have a guy with me today. He's a fellow retired police sergeant. He's a police trainer, and now he's a filmmaker with some really interesting projects that he's done in the past and some new ones in the works. Jason Harney, welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Betsy. Thanks for having me.
So I want to talk right away about a project that I know is absolutely close to your heart. It's close to mine as well, and that is a film called The Wounded Blue. And it talk about how you got involved in making The Wounded Blue.
Well, it was a great opportunity from a very good friend of mine, Randy Sutton. We both work for the same agency, Las Vegas Metro Police, retired from the same. And Randy knew after we had both been retired that I'd gone into filmmaking, making documentary films. And he was in the early stages at the time. This was probably around mid 2018, to creating his national assistance organization for injured and disabled police officers, the Wounded Blue. And, as he explained it to me, just sitting down for coffee one day, he wanted to have a documentary that would show the stories as to how he was inspired to create the organization. He was flooded for years with Facebook messages and, just these heartfelt stories about police officers who ultimately were not being taken care of by their agencies after being involved in critical incidents such as shootings, traffic accidents, and the multitude of issues that cops face where they could find themselves either injured, disabled, or mentally compromised in some fashion. And he wanted to do something about it and thought that a really good way to start the organization would be to show people why and have that tool at his disposal. So that's how the Wounded Blue film came into play. We spent the majority of the rest of 2018 going into 2019 traveling around the country and meeting with police officers who inspired the organization to be created. And then that is how the film was made.
So this film, if you haven't seen it, is just absolutely incredible. And in fact, it's won numerous awards. Even the film's trailer has won awards. And so I want to play just a couple minutes of that trailer.
It's a weekly, daily, and monthly challenge of what we're going to juggle, how to get the bills paid, how to even put food on the table. We have 3 boys.
Craig was injured in a shooting. He didn't die that day, and you couldn't see his injuries, but he died from those injuries. So my motto since the beginning is not one more, but no one should die from PTSD.
What good is it to teach us how to survive on these streets until we get home and everything falls to crap and we don't know what's happening to us and we don't know what to do about it? Our families are falling, our families are struggling, my kids are crying because nobody told me that I'm supposed to be still fighting here.
There are times when, for no reason, I'll just start crying. Or I'll get into a rage. For no reason. There are times when I wake up at night screaming, and I can smell gunpowder, I can smell blood.
I felt like as long as I could come back to work, I was useful to the department. They could use me. The minute I couldn't, even though it was work-related, throw them away.
They've given everything they can up to the edge of their life. And what they do have left of a life is compromised because of what they've given.
This is taking place all over America. This is a national tragedy. This is something that is not known within the American public. It is not even known oftentimes within law enforcement circles itself.
Well, guess what? I am you. And I have post-traumatic stress disorder.
So, Jason, that is every time I watch that trailer, and I've watched it 50 times, I just get so choked up. It's so emotional. And the whole film is like that. And I don't think people really understand that so very often when police officers get hurt, or like you said, they get mentally compromised from, either one critical incident or accumulation of critical incidents, that their police department doesn't always take care of them, do they?
They don't, I fall into that same category. Previously, I worked for what I consider a very great agency, one that was progressive, did the right thing more often than not, considering the entire agency and the wellness of our cops. We had a police employees assistance program, short for PEEP, that was the peer counseling that is talked about by the Wounded Blue, something that I took for granted. That was available to us in the early 1990s. Come to find out, the majority of police departments in this country still don't have peer counseling, which is why the Wounded Blue has a national assistance organization, has its own peer team that responds 24/7, because you have cops that are either suffering from cumulative trauma from these various incidents over a period of years, or they're involved in a critical incident that, bottom line is they need to talk to somebody who has been through what they've been through. It's not always, feasible to speak with your spouse or significant other about something like that. You need to talk to somebody who has been there, who can calm you and make sure you know above and beyond that you are not alone. And, that's really the thing that the film really hammers home, is that these cops, I mean, they were in horrible situations, to where one Anne Marie Carrizales is involved in a shooting one day. The next payday, she doesn't get paid because she's sent into this broken workers' comp system. Or you have another officer, Charles Neal, who's involved in a terrible crash when a group of cartel assassins were on the way to Kansas City to assassinate a judge. And he happened to stop them in a traffic stop in Oklahoma. And when they fled and he chased them, he was taking automatic rifle fire, and ultimately was shot in the head, got in a terrible crash. Well, guess what his agency did? Not only did he lose his entire paycheck, but he now had to sell his house, his cars, and couldn't put food on the table for his family. And he has 3 boys. So, terrible circumstances for these cops, these heroes, and these heroic actions involved in, and yet their agencies were not taking care of them. Now, granted, the vast majority of agencies are 50 officers or smaller. I believe it's about 80% of all the agencies in this, about 18,000 plus in this country.
Yes.
They just don't have the budgets, the wherewithal, the infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, to be able to take care of these cops when they inevitably are involved in these incidents. And it's very sad to see.
Now, Jason, you're not just a guy who makes films and you happened upon this. You're a veteran, and you're also a retired police sergeant. Talk for a minute about your police career, because you did a lot of different things during your law enforcement career.
Well, certainly no different than anybody else. All of our brothers and sisters, who have had that opportunity to serve their communities as a member of a police agency. You end up doing a lot of different things. And I was blessed to have worked for a large agency, which meant you had the ability to move around if you wanted to every couple years. So yeah, I worked in, patrol, did field training, and worked bike patrol on the Strip in downtown. But one of the best assignments I ever had is I became a training and counseling officer in our police academy. Was there in the late 1990s. Went on to be a robbery detective, and then spent my last 13 or 14 years on the department as a police sergeant, and went to all of those units basically all over again, including becoming the academy sergeant. And near and dear to my heart, without a doubt, when it came to my police career, was the training aspect and being a law enforcement trainer, and taking that, seriously, to the point where you do want to be the best. You want to be the most proficient, the most tactically sound, the most physically fit. And, that's kind of how I modeled myself, and followed a lot of really good mentors that set the example for me long before me.
So how did you make this transition into filmmaking?
Well, I am that, that garden variety movie nut that you hear about, the one who can quote every movie, going back for, my era. And always really interested in filmmaking. And this started long before I had ever left. I mean, a lot of cops will have certain passions that are outside of their job. I always recommend that. I don't think you want police to be what you live and breathe. It's your profession. You take it seriously as a profession, but you need something that kind of lets you decompress, be it what it may. Some cops like to hunt and fish and play golf and do those kinds of things. I was just learning everything I could about filmmaking. And I had some people who worked in the video production unit at Las Vegas Metro at the time in the late 90s, who actually, when I worked at the Academy, they were in the same building. So in all my off time, my weekends, I spent with them going and doing film shoots for things they were producing for the agency, whether it be a training video or a PSA or something for the sheriff's office. And, that's how I learned the technical aspect of it. And I opened a production company in 2003, started doing like smaller projects that you could still get done when you're working 40 hours a week, like, small commercials, corporate videos, training, stuff like that, with the idea that when I finally retired, 25 years later, that I would make feature films because they're very full-time and time consuming. And, that's where I'm at now.
Now you had a documentary project too, called Voices of the Blue. Talk about that a minute, because that's another thing that I think, gosh, everyone in this country who supports law enforcement needs to see.
I certainly agree. And that's again, a very tough nut to crack. I mean, why are people not seeing law enforcement content? Well, I certainly don't need to explain that to you, because I know above and you certainly understand. I mean, you're dealing with an algorithm that I believe, sways people away from those types of things that are deemed, I guess, pro-police. I mean, in this case, Voices of the Blue, kind of a sort of sequel to the Wounded Blue film, but it's a 6-part docuseries that takes a much deeper dive into other stories about officers who suffer from post-traumatic stress, who have contemplated suicide, and who have had issues with that cumulative trauma, running the gamut from people in California all the way to the East Coast and everywhere in between. Again, myself and Randy Sutton, we traveled the country and talked to these cops. And, when you do that, you begin to understand just how nationwide this problem is. Randy will call it a national tragedy, as he says in the film. He couldn't be more correct. It's extremely tragic because, it just reminds me of the way, it took us forever as a country, as a society, to really learn we have to take care of our veterans, right? Starting probably into the early world wars, but Vietnam, more specifically when they were coming back and the way they were treated. It took a long time to embrace the condition of post-traumatic stress, and that when you are put in a place, let's say the theater of war, and you're going to see terrible things, the bottom line is, some people are going to react differently, but you're not going to come back the person you were. It's going to change you, and it could be for the worse if you don't get help. Well, whether you're firing a round at somebody in Afghanistan or Iraq, or you do that in Philadelphia, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, somewhere in Texas, it doesn't matter. You're still going to have the same nightmares. It's still going to have the same mental effect, and you still need to get help. So the question is, are these agencies doing enough? And that is what the Voices of the Blue docuseries, which anyone can watch for free on YouTube, is sets out to kind of answer those questions and figure out just what are the solutions.
One of the things about law enforcement and our communities as well, we do a really good job of burying our dead and honoring our fallen. We don't necessarily do a great job of continuing to honor those that are catastrophically wounded in the line of duty. And so, you have Voices of the Blue, you have the Wounded Blue, documentary, and yet you're having a hard time getting those projects out to people, even though they're completely available. And part of it is social media is a problem, right? We talk a lot about a big tech tyranny. And it's true, right? With Facebook and Twitter, getting some of this pro law enforcement content, YouTube out there, isn't it?
Well, certainly one of your last guests on the show, Ray Dietrich, explained that perfectly. And from his own experience, it is truly sad. And to a certain extent, yes, I have no doubt that, my films that are pro law enforcement and are meant to tell, both the positive stories about law enforcement that the mainstream media ignores, as well as address the critical issues that law enforcement faces that the mainstream media also tends to ignore. I'm sure they don't fit that algorithm that big tech wants, that will sway people to watch both these films and the docuseries that we put on YouTube. It has been very frustrating.
Now, Jason, you're involved right now in the middle of another film project that I want you to talk about for a minute, because it's really different and it's exciting. So let's talk about that a minute.
Well, as you know, you've been a longtime police trainer yourself, and so when you hear about some of these training issues, it's really preaching to the choir. As trainers, we're that rare breed that certainly believes in a certain level of police training. So this film, if you think about it, all the defensive tactics and use of force training the police officers taught in this country, every single tactic to every technique has lineage to the martial arts. Well, you think about your average martial artist, just through perception or what general knowledge will lead you to believe that they are disciplined, that they are proficient, that they are dedicated, typically physically fit, mentally sound. They have confidence in what they're doing. Why do they have that confidence? Well, because they practice. They've practiced for decades upon decades. But if we're saying that every technique cops are taught has lineage to martial arts, do any of the attributes I just described remind you of most of the cops in this country? Probably not. And it's not their fault. It's a culture issue. It is a culture issue where, as a profession, I believe that we have failed mightily to ensure that police officers know, as part of their profession, they need to stay proficient in these tactics. Why do we have situations like we did outside Minneapolis a month ago, where, a very veteran officer believes that she is pulling her taser, but pulls her gun? Well, as a trainer, the first thing you come to think of is, well, how much practice has she had in, transferring from tool to tool on that belt? How often have you done that in a training environment? How much stress and realism has been put into that training environment? It's a national problem. So this film is going to talk to people who are both high-level martial artists, but also retired police officers and police trainers who can weigh in on those issues. Do we need national defensive tactics standards instead of 18,000 different ones? How do we get police officers or police agencies to create a culture that ultimately says, hey, from this point on, you need to know that your training is number one. We work 10-hour shifts on my agency. I would even go as far as to say that 1 10-hour day per week should be dedicated to training, period. But when we talk about defunding the police, we know, and this was just mentioned on your last program as well, that the first place they cut is training. Well, is it any surprise as to why we have a lot of cops that are out of practice, grossly out of shape? I'm sure you're aware that, unfortunately, we have the dubious distinction as a profession of being the most obese workforce in the entire country at about 41%, which is far and away the worst of any workforce. It's just, we want to talk about those issues and bring them to the forefront and really hopefully get not the police side, but the mainstream side to understand, even the people we deem on the left or the right, to get the idea that you need to invest capital into these police departments and get them to be better trained. That's what this film will be about.
I am so excited about this film. I can't wait till it comes out. Where can people find you on social media? Where can they find your films, Jason?
Well, my website, lightningdigitalentertainment.com, certainly has official site pages for all of my films with trailers and information on where you can either rent or purchase, and in some cases, watch them for free. On social media, not the biggest fan of social media, but I do have a Twitter account. It's at Jason Harney 72. And I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me there, where for the most part, things remain non-political and quite professional, which I like. But yeah, it's 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 like one of those things where you just got to kind of try to put that information out there and hope that the right people see it and follow that cause. And when it comes to pro-police content, I have to tell you, Betsy, it's an uphill climb. I know you know that. It's very difficult. But I'm hoping that, the more eyeballs we get on this stuff, maybe we can start to change those narratives. Maybe we can even get the mainstream media to start to understand and realize that, we need our cops here. I always tell people, if you want to see what a world it would be like, and I'm not kidding about this, without police, watch a couple seasons of The Walking Dead. Because I mean, in all seriousness, we would just be a bunch of gangs running around, pillaging off of each other. And that's the world that we would have. We both know that's just complete, silly talk. And it's not something that's probably going to happen despite the efforts of certain people. But I think as a profession, we can continue to do better. We have to evolve and become something more along the lines of what people actually perceive. No, we can't kick everybody's ass. No, we're not superheroes, but we can still be better. We can be more proficient, more physically fit. And I do believe it all starts with creating that culture.
Jason Harney, we really appreciate you spending time with us today. And if you would like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
This year, over 50,000 law enforcement officers have been assaulted while on duty. A vast number of these attacks were filmed and uploaded to social media in the pursuit of likes and attention.
What they want to do is film you instead of what can I do to help this officer?
Together, we can change this disturbing trend.
If that individual would have hit the right spot, it could have been it for me. Last time I would have saw my wife, my kids.
I'm Mike Solon. Law enforcement officers need your support. If you see an officer under attack, then follow these simple steps in order to help. 1. Call 911 and give the officer's exact location. 2. Ask the officer if you can assist. If the officer accepts, then do whatever you can do to safely help. 3. If the officer declines, then start filming and be a good witness. It's time to stop filming and start helping.